Hi guys, or should I say hello comrades. Today I would like to share my thoughts about HBO miniseries Chernobyl. And for those who don't know me, my name is Sergey and I was born in the USSR. I was born in 1971 in Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, the city that located south of Chernobyl. I believe it's approximately 50 miles, something like that. So I was in Kiev in 1986 when Chernobyl explosion happened. So this mini-series was very interesting to me because I was somewhat a witness. Although I never been in Chernobyl or Pripyat, I was in Kiev and I experienced a lot of the events that was shown in this mini-series. So this is what I think about Chernobyl. First of all, I'm very impressed with accuracy that they made this show. Those the little details for the people who familiar with events or places. It's very important to see that was displayed correctly. And this show, they did amazing job. Like there was a correct vehicles, even correct license plates. That blew my mind away because that's the last thing that people pay attention is the license plates. But they had a correct license plates for civilian cars, for military trucks. Like most military trucks had the black color license plates was white lettering, and then it had the 4 numbers and 2 letters, and that's how the military vehicles were marked. And they had that correct vehicles, as I said already, Russian, Soviet-made helicopters. So everything was just like, my goodness, sometimes I felt like I'm went back in time, back in 1986. The sounds of the phones, how they rang, that's so Soviet. Even like clothing, glass frames. I don't know if you pay attention to those details, but when I was a teenager, I had a horrible time to find a nice looking glasses frames because there were none. They were all plastic, bulky, big, and ugly. And this is what you see in the show. Ugly, big plastic glasses. And I was like, oh my God, this is so true. But what I really want to talk about in my video today is about several things that they should cover in their show. I believe, super important to give you like real flavor, real understanding how the central governments, how the dictatorships are handling large-scale problems, large-scale catastrophes. So let's take a look at the things that Chernobyl miniseries missed, but they should have it in their show. Number 1, classical music on the radio. Okay, I will need to explain, for those who don't watch my Ushanka show, I need to explain you one interesting detail about the life of Soviet people. In mostly all the apartments, houses, homes of Soviet people, we had, besides the electrical outlets, we'd also have a so-called radio outlet or radio tochka. So you don't necessarily have a phone line, but the government would make sure that you have a radio line. It looks exactly like a telephone cable, but there will be radio translations transmitted through those cables. And all you need is to buy a radio, but it's not the wireless radio. It's the radio you plug in this radio outlet, radio tochka, and it's enough power in that outlet to make the radio work, and usually just have one radio station that you could listen. So every house, every apartment had radios, 1 or 2. Like my apartment had a 3-room apartment. We had 2 radios, one in the kitchen and one in the living room. And this is the what you use to listen to news, and then they have music programs and some other radio programs, and there'll be a mix of Moscow programming and then local. So for example, in Kiev, we'll have some Ukrainian radio programs, and then we have some from Moscow. So this is how most Soviet people were getting news. It would be TV, newspapers, and radio, like that, wide radios. So this is what happened. So the Chernobyl explosion happened at the night of April 26, 1986, and that was Saturday. And when something bad happens in Soviet Union, like big deal, for example, like the death of the general secretary of the Communist Party, And since everything government owned, all mass media is owned by government, so no one will just produce any news on their own. They'll wait for the instructions from the Moscow. So if something happens that they're not ready yet, so they know there's, for example, something bad happened, they don't want to continue entertainment programs, so they shut off all their transmissions, and they just start playing classical music. And this is really bad sign in Soviet Union when you turn the radio on and all you hear is the classical music playing hour after hour, Tchaikovsky or whatever, and this is the first sign, oh crap, something really bad happened. In 1986, I was 15-year-old, so by that time I experienced several of those classical music moments on the radio. When Leonid Brezhnev passed away, then Andropov passed away, then Chernenko, they played classical music for hours before announcing to the country we lost our great leader. So when I heard classical music on Saturday, I think it was in the afternoon, that's when they realized that events in Chernobyl would be really bad. They stopped all the translations, started playing classical music, but no one knew what's going on. And it's not just Kiev, it's the whole country. They had a radio playing classical music. So, of course, the rumors flying, people talk to each other trying to find out what's going on. So my first thought was, oh my goodness, I can't believe Gorbachev died. He was so young. And this was my first impression when I heard the classical music on April 26, 1986, that Gorbachev passed away. And then, of course, since Kiev was so close to Chernobyl, we started, like a rumor mill, something happened at Chernobyl. There's some kind of explosion. We don't know what's going on. It's probably serious, but we don't know. So this is, I think that Chernobyl miniseries missed big time. And it's not expensive to show, right? They could just show different places in Russia, in Ukraine, all over the country that people are turning their radios on, and all they hear is the classical music. I think it will be a really, really strong moment to show as the classical music. When people desperate for information, government provides none. So this is first thing they missed, classical music on the radio in the days after Chernobyl explosion. Number 2, the truth about Chernobyl. Another amazing, in a bad meaning of the word, is, for example, people like me, my family in Kiev, we discovered how bad Chernobyl accident was, not from our own government, but from our enemies. You see, during the Soviet Union, United States, Germany, Britain, they had a propaganda war, you could say it. So there were radio stations like The Voice of America, BBC, German Wave, Free Europe. So there were radio stations that transmitted programs on the shortwave. And if you have a shortwave radio, you could listen to that. And so they were called the voices of enemies. The radio station called Voice of America. So in mass media in Soviet Union, they were called that you're listening to the enemy voices. And that's the radio stations that started warning Soviet people about dangers of radiation. Now, if you think it was easy to listen to those radio stations, all you need to have is a shortwave radio, you're wrong. Because Soviet government was fighting super hard the fake news. We can say that those enemy voices were producing fake news. So all those radio stations, those frequencies were jammed extremely hard. So you turn on the shortwave radio, you kind of, search around, you start listening, and suddenly there'll be there's loud noise of jamming. So there'll be big, almost like radio stations in Soviet Union creating this radio noise to block the transmissions from abroad, to block the fake news. But I remember my father, he had a good quality shortwave radio, and we caught a bits of it, and what they were telling us were horrifying, because Soviet government was super quiet even after they stopped playing classical music and announced we had an accident in Chernobyl power plant, everything under control, we will let you know what's going on. There was nothing else, zip. Now, what the radio stations from US told us was completely different. And information was like that. Please stay indoors. Keep your windows closed. Try to seal them, like glue the paper on the seams of the window. Don't consume any fresh foods. Don't buy fresh milk. Don't buy any greens, any strawberries, nothing fresh. Try to eat canned goods. Stay indoors. Minimize being outside. Wash your shoes. If you have to go outside, you need to wash off your clothes, wash your shoes, but just basically stay indoors. Don't go anywhere. Keep the dust down. So it was like, oh my goodness, are they joking? Are they for real? Because we don't know how bad the radiation pollution was, for example, in Kiev. Number 3, iodine poisoning. Now, if you watch the Chernobyl show, you notice there were a couple times this lady, the nuclear scientist from Belarus, was given away iodine pills. But they didn't explain, which I don't blame them. It's quite complicated to explain why you give people iodine pills. But iodine pills, which is potassium iodide, they help to block radioactive iodine from being absorbed by your thyroid gland. So what happens during a nuclear accident, when the release of radioactive materials happens, like out of reactor or during the nuclear explosion, one of the most radioactive materials is iodine. It's really radioactive, although it has a really short half-life, like 8 days, and it decays completely. But the problem that your thyroid gland using iodine to produce different enzymes for your body. So if there's iodines in the air, it will, you breathe it in, it goes into your thyroid gland, and that's how you can get cancer really bad if you get those radioactive iodines in your glands. So the purpose of iodine pill is to give you iodine so you can't take in any more of radioactive stuff. So you get a neutral iodines, and like when you eat a lot of food you can't eat anymore. That's how your thyroid gland is packed full with iodine from the pill. So for 24 hours you're good. You won't absorb any radioactive iodines. So this is a standard procedure. Any places where there's a risk of some nuclear exposure, you have iodine pills available to block these initial radioactive iodines. So they didn't explain that, which is okay, but we had a lot of people got poisoned by iodine, and let me explain you why. So once people learned that you need to take iodine pills, but there were none, you couldn't just go to the drugstore. I think even like United States, you can just go to the local drugstore like Walgreens and say, hey, I would like to buy some iodine pills. But in Soviet Union, we used iodine solution for treating like wounds. So instead of applying antiseptic, we didn't have really those. You have these little bottles you could buy, I think like 10 kopecks, and it'll be like alcohol and iodine mixed. So it makes your clothing stain, and if you apply it on your skin, it's like a rusty color stain. So people were buying those iodine solutions, which is made to treat your wounds, and they were drinking it. Now, if you would mix it like dilute with water, you probably be okay. But if you drink it straight, it's quite, I don't know, I would say poisonous, but it's really bad for your stomach. It hurts your stomach. So a lot of people got poisoned because they were desperate, panicky about iodines. They were drinking iodine solution and get poisoned. So that would be another cool thing to show in the Chernobyl show, is how people were drinking that stuff. And so this, once again, lack of proper information from government caused people to do those stupid things. Now, if you remember in the show, when they finally started evacuating Pripyat, which is the name of the town right next to Chernobyl power plant, and a decision was made 36 hours later. So they anyhow, they were not making their mind, although there was a horrible radioactive conditions in Pripyat. They just took all the buses they could find, took all the drivers they could find, and started evacuating people. So, for example, in Kiev and other areas around, because, it's Ukraine right next to Chernobyl, we just basically had all the buses disappeared. Like, city almost got paralyzed because suddenly there is no mass transportation. We still get tramways, subway, and trolley buses, but suddenly there were hardly any buses on the streets. They were all gone, and no one knew what happened. So that'll be another kind of cool detail to show people staying on the bus stop, waiting for a bus and wondering what's going on because buses are gone. Another small detail that I remember from my father's place of work, from his factory, they volunteered, in parentheses, all the drivers to do the evacuation. So the drivers were pretty much forced to drive the buses to evacuate the people. And about 20 years later, all those drivers were dead. Like, they died in their early 50s, 60s from heart attacks, cancers, different diseases. There was only one driver that at that time, in April of 1986, he was in hospital having a surgery. So he never went to Chernobyl to do evacuations, and he was still driving a bus. Everyone else passed away. But of course, they didn't count them as the victims of Chernobyl. So this is big discrepancy, how many people actually died as an aftermath of Chernobyl catastrophe. They never count those, for example, drivers that participated in evacuations and then went back to their jobs and died later because, number would be just huge. Another important thing that Chernobyl show missed is a parade, May parade in Kiev. So there's two big holidays in Soviet Union used to be, and it's still, I think, in Russia. It's May 1st, International Workers' Solidarity Day, and May 9th, Victory Day. Now, May 1st was one of the worst for the radiological conditions in Kiev. It's when wind started blowing south from Chernobyl, and now they declassified KGB reports. In Kiev, on May 1st, the radiation levels were between 500 to 1200 millirem an hour. 500 to 1200 millirem an hour. Now, let me explain you how bad it is. Now, if you live on planet Earth, which probably you do, just from the natural radiation, like from the sun, from granite, and other things, you get about 600 millirem a year. That's a normal, like a radiological exposure that every human has on Earth. 600 a year. Here you're getting pretty much 600 every hour. So if you were in Kiev for one day on May 1st, you are getting about 24 rem, not millirem, 24 rem a day. Now you're going to say, okay, so how bad is 24 rem exposure for one day? And I can tell you, all you do is just go to NRC website, which is the Nuclear Regulatory Commission of the United States that regulates all the nuclear power plants in America. And it tells you that if you work in a nuclear industry, your limit, your exposure limit for 1 year is 5 rem. So 5 rem a year, this is the max you're allowed to get dose working in a nuclear plant. After 5 rem, you have to stop and take a break and not to work for another till the next year starts and you kind of reset to zero. Because it considers after 5 rem it's become really harmful to your health. So the limit for nuclear workers is 5 rem a year. I was in Kiev on May 1st and I got 24 rem in one single day. So people were getting 5 years worth of dose in a single day. So that's how bad the radiation was. And it's, kind of like spike depending on the wind direction. And it's got those half-life, different radioactive elements. But this is how bad was radiation in Kyiv. And it's the capital of Ukraine, population of 3 million people. Another not so cute detail. So for example, if you work in the nuclear industry, and of course they have areas that have some radiation, so they've been controlled. And the high radiation areas considers it has about 100 millirem an hour. So any areas when 100 millirem an hour, it's considered high radiation. If it has 1 rem an hour, it considers locked high radiation area. So any worker that works can't just go in those areas. He actually needs to have a permission, have a special brief, have a radiation protection person with him with a special key, and they track you, how much you get dose, and this is like big deal. So 1 rem an hour, it's a locked high red area. Kiev had 1200, the max was 1200 milligrams, so 1.2 rem an hour. So the whole Kiev technically was a locked high red areas, and it was never evacuated. And besides that it was never evacuated, they had a parade on May 1st. There was a parade in downtown Kiev when it was this horrible radiation. They had kids, they had adults marching on the street with the red flags and red banners. And actually, what I read, Gorbachev forced the local party leader, Sherbitsky, he gave him a choice. Like, or you have a parade in Kiev on May 1st to show everyone that we're doing just fine, or you gonna put your party ticket on the table, which means like you need to basically quit your career, quit being a member of Communist Party. So he was a choice. So I destroy your career or you have a parade. And he made the choice. And we had a parade in Kiev on May 1st on the worst day possible, when Kiev was just basically covered by the cloud from Chernobyl. So this is a huge thing that unfortunately Chernobyl show missed. Now, if you remember, they also talked about that actually, since the Soviet government tried to keep it secret, the way the secret got out is the radiation was detected like in Sweden on their nuclear plants, and all over the Europe they actually had a radiation spiked, and that's how they got suspicious that something going on in Soviet Union. What they could do in a Chernobyl miniseries to show more, because I happen to talk to people ex-Navy who served in U.S. Navy those years. And for example, in Scotland, they have a U.S. Navy base there for the submarines. And they had alarms going off on their subs because, you know, they have detectors, outside detectors, inside detectors. So they had alarms, high radiation alarms blaring. And of course they have procedures, you know, if something like that happens, we probably have a leaker. So they go leave the port, go underwater, and they run their checks to see what's going on, why we have radiation alarms. And that did happen in Scotland. And they, after running all the tests and checks, it's like, that's not us. So this is how bad radiation was, that in Scotland, at the United States Navy base, they noticed, and it was so high level that they actually went to the alert. Similar thing happened. I talked to the guy who was a radiation specialist on U.S. carrier. I don't know which one, but at a nuclear U.S. carrier in Atlantics, and it was exactly the same situation happened. They detected radiation. Radiation monitors detected radiation, and they went on a high alert because they thought they're leaking. And just to find out that no, that wasn't us. So this is how far radiation from Chernobyl reached, all the way to Scotland, all the way somewhere middle of Atlantic. And even on the west coast, because we have several nuclear plants on the west coast in California, their outside monitors recorded elevated levels of radiation. So of course they had to figure out what's going on, and they couldn't explain. Because they say, we're doing fine, we know it's not us, but what is happening? So this is how far the pollution from the Chernobyl reached. And I think they'll be kind of cool to show people those details. As I mentioned, there's radiation alerts in Scotland, and on Mid-Atlantic, in California, May 1st parade in Kiev, and like the classical music on the radios, all those little details I think will make the show even more powerful. And one more last thing. So I was 15 and I was in the 8th grade in 1986. And in Soviet school system, 8th grade was kind of like it's called not a complete high school. So after 8th grade, this high school starts. So actually you could leave school after 8th grade and go to like trade schools or just go work. And since the 5th grade, in the end of each school year, would have a final test, like exams. And if you fail them, they'll make you stay for another year to study all over again. So the 8th grade was kind of a big deal because you got your finals was determined, like what is your scores after 8 years. So they're usually end of May. And of course, when people started realizing how bad situation with radiation in Kiev, a lot of parents wanted to take their kids away from the city because radiation affects kids the worst, the most. But we were told you need to stay and pass your finals, otherwise we'll fail you automatically and you'll have to remain for another year in school. So we're technically locked in, we're forced to stay in Kiev and finish school year and then do our tests, and only after that we could leave. Like, for example, my parents sent me to Leningrad, and I covered that in my video. If you're interested, you can search through my videos. I covered that topic about trip to Leningrad, but we were forced to stay in Kiev to finish school and do our tests. So that was another ugly thing they did to us, is to lock people in city. They said it was so bad radiation-wise, but they still made us stay. And of course, there's this helpless feeling because, rumors going around and people saying like all the government officials, all the party officials, they sending their kids out of Kiev, but they make us to stay to prevent panic. Like you couldn't purchase any train tickets, everything was sold off. There were people, like some people found out how bad it is. A guy who worked at the airport, he goes like, do you know what's going on? Because like every plane is packed leaving from Moscow or Leningrad or any direction, and every plane has the kids of our government officials. Like, do you know what's happening? There's something really bad happening. So this is another thing that they did to us, the Soviet government did. They made us to stay while sending their own kids away from the danger. So this is the things I think I'm kind of not happy that the Chernobyl show missed, because it could make it even more powerful statement, but still I think they did an amazing job. It's really accurate. I wasn't in Chernobyl, so like those technical details about what's going on with the firefighters and other things, I'm not sure, but generally like lifestyle, how the Soviet people clothing looked, our apartment buildings, cars, license plates, I said everything is really accurate. They did a fantastic job with that. So good job, guys, and great show. But I said I wish they talk to other people about, because these things they missed, I think, is a big deal. Anyways, thank you for watching my videos, and please post your comments if you know anything about that or you have any questions. I'll be more than happy to answer. I'll talk to you later. До свидания. Goodbye.
And if you love my channel and would like to show your support, please click on the link below this video and become the patron of the Ushanka show. For as little as $1, you can help us grow and create the new interesting videos about the life in Soviet Union.